Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Crystal.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Mothers of All Crime. This is going to be part 2 of Casey Anthony. For anyone who missed episode 1, definitely go back and listen to that. We give a little bit of background on who Casey Anthony is, the disappearance of her daughter Kaylee, and what she did and the family did up until that point. So currently, we are at the body of Kaylee Anthony has been discovered. Casey Anthony has been indicted, and now we're going to move into the family reaction, the trial, and a little bit of the media response. So, Monica, do you want to start with telling me a little bit about the family's response to like the body being found and things like that? Because that was pretty intense.
It was very intense. I think we mentioned last time that George and Cindy were on a media tour in California when the body was actually discovered. So they flew back, and it took about a week for the DNA to come back confirming that this is Kaylee Anthony. And at the same time, a DNA test was also performed to see if George Anthony was the father of Kaylee after the body had been found, which he was not. But it's just important to know that was tested. And George, in this time of this like horrible upheaval where his daughter is being indicted for murder charges, his granddaughter is confirmed dead, he is despondent and depressed, and he makes a suicide attempt, and it was intercepted, and he was brought to the hospital, and he did not die, but he did leave a 5-page handwritten suicide note, which I thought was interesting what he wrote in it.
Yeah, and he attempted suicide in a hotel, if I remember too. And it
Yeah.
is interesting that that was his response to his granddaughter being found, because I see one side of it where you are just devastated and you just don't know where to go from here, like because your grandchild is basically like everyone knows the grandchild becomes the favorite once like they exist. Like your kids don't matter anymore.
Right.
But
Yeah.
at the same time, there were rumors around and accusations that he had sexually abused his daughter Kaylee. Excuse me, Casey.
Yes.
And that's kind of why
Yes.
that
But there was
led
also
to that paternity.
Yeah. There was also accusations that he had been abusing Kaylee that were made by Casey. And these were being communicated
Right.
to George through the defense team. It hadn't been brought up in court yet, but it was going to be, and it was brought up to his attention, and he had a very poor reaction to the events that were happening, somewhat understandably. But I think that some people viewed his attempt as a way to get out of consequences of what was happening. There was definitely that perception by some people at the time, and even now. It's kind of like
because
hard to speculate
can
on
you
his motives.
imagine? Oh yeah, but like
No.
say hypothetically, because there's never been proof that he actually did this to his daughter and his granddaughter. Right. Casey has gone into she did an interview recently, relatively recently, and she talked about the abuse with her father. And she said it happened from like ages 8 to 12, and that there was no way he could be the father of her daughter. But again, like that wasn't that long ago for her lifetime. So I think if those things are true, his suicide attempt makes kind of sense of if this came out, he could be arrested and sent to jail, and he didn't want to face those consequences. So having those accusations time up with the suicide attempt, I mean, it kind of, to me at least, goes, all right, well, what are you running from?
Yeah, I've definitely thought about that as well, which I also see those qualities in Casey. I feel like I said this last time and I'll say it again. Like, I feel like her and George are extremely similar, which is partially why they have such a toxic relationship because it's hard to get along with someone who's extremely similar to you. And George was
Mm-hmm.
like a chronic, persistent liar as well, pathological liar. And I
Yeah.
think that there's other things that are referenced in the note and in the days leading up to his attempt where he talks about being a terrible husband, essentially, which he was. And there was a point where George and Cindy were separated when Kaylee was a baby. And that was based, he had stolen money. He was pretending to work when he wasn't working. He'd been having affairs. He was on hooker websites. Like, George did a lot of questionable shit. And I think that you could also argue the opposite. Like, maybe if you're innocent of these terrible things that you're being accused of, but your child is the one accusing you and things have gone so horribly wrong and you feel responsible just because you were a bad husband and father, not necessarily because you were a rapist and a murderer. I think that
Mm.
could also put a lot of pressure on somebody and just be an abject horror at the way their life is turning out. And I could see that as being, that could
Yeah.
also lead to an attempt like this.
Yeah. Because even Cindy at one point, who's Casey's mom, did make an accusation kind of blaming George for Casey's behaviors. Like,
Yeah.
she basically said that Casey learned how to be a liar and have this type of personality from her father. So it's interesting that like you mentioned, they're very similar, and even her own mother did notice that and recognize it.
Yes. And I think a lot of people are quick to say, like, in reference to this trial, that Casey just made up these accusations about her father and her brother during like the time that she had been arrested and like in preparation for the trial. But there is some evidence that she told two of her previous boyfriends about abuse that she'd suffered from each of them when she was a teenager. So
Hmm.
it was, and but like I don't know how credible that is either, because again, Casey lies about everything and George lies about everything, so you can't believe what they say. But it is not true that she made it up specifically for this purpose. Like, it was years before anything happened to Kaylee that she was telling people this.
Right. And it wasn't public knowledge that she was
Right.
sharing this. These were like intimate details she was sharing with someone that was close to her that she knew wouldn't share with others. So,
Yeah.
though she was a liar, and that's been proven and said by pretty much everyone,
Mm-hmm.
it would surprise me to find something like this, because if it was, she would have made it more public. At least I think so. Because
Hmm.
it's not something you lie about that you gain something from. Every other lie that said so far, there was something to gain from it or something to avoid. Because the abuse that she accused her father was 8 to 12, and her brother was 8 to, 12 to 15. And
Mm-hmm.
she told her mom about her brother. And it's interesting that like her mom's reaction was just kind of like, well, what'd you do to deserve it?
Ugh.
Not how, oh my God, I can't believe my son did this. Let me get you help. It was all blamed on Casey, which as a mother, I cannot even imagine that behavior. Um, but I guess if you want to get out of something, you're not going to start doing that years before and casually saying to your boyfriend, because like that's an uncomfortable thing to
Mm.
talk about, like a significant other with. Like that's some serious trauma that you're dumping onto them.
Yeah. And I guess maybe it adds some credibility that it was two separate people that she told this to that independently corroborated it, guys
Hmm.
that didn't really know each other. But it's also, Casey is such an elaborate liar and her motives are unclear a lot of the time. And I could see how maybe, I mean, to me, those accusations only have negative responses. But I think if you're just looking for attention or sympathy or to shock someone, then I could see her saying that even if it was not true. Which I'm
Hmm.
not saying it's not true. I honestly don't know.
Yeah. And then I think one thing they brought up in the trial is looking at her behaviors. So, someone who did suffer childhood abuse and childhood sexual abuse of those types of natures, they developed certain coping mechanisms that Kaylee did display while her daughter was missing during the trial. A lot of these kids learn the ability to detach and be able to live a completely separate life than maybe what they're feeling and processing because they had to in
I
order to survive.
That is like a great choice of words. I think that she totally detaches and compartmentalizes and creates new realities for herself when she does not like the current one.
Mm-hmm.
I think that those are like definitely things that are associated with childhood abuse for sure. It's like you said, it's a coping mechanism. I think it's super, super interesting that none of the mental health experts that evaluated Casey diagnosed her with anything or even said that she had, like, the media was very quick to say that she's a narcissist, that she has antisocial personality, that she was slammed in the press and maligned and called all of
Mm-hmm.
these terms, but none of the psych experts said that. They all said she
Oh,
was
yeah.
normal psychologically, which, is she that good of a liar that she can literally trick all of these experts?
No.
Or is she sane?
Yeah. I don't think you could. It's one thing to be able to like manipulate one therapist, but to be able to manipulate that many is so slim for her. Like these people that's literally what they do for a living is they talk
I
to
know.
people in determined competency and they probably have seen it all. The chance of her lying that well to all of them is so rare. But I think with the media, I'm so glad you brought that up because like the media in this case went out of control.
Oh yeah.
Where we mentioned before, like they were picketing outside of these people's houses for just for the sake of doing it. And there was a Twitter page that it was the first major trial basically by social media. And I think OJ was like the next major one. And like you said, they started throwing these terms out, but like the general person doesn't actually understand what the definition of a sociopath is or a narcissist is. They just throw
That's
these
true.
terms out there. They're like, oh, you're being very selfish. You must be a narcissist. There's so much more to it than just one part of behavior. Like,
Yeah.
but
And to
how else
be
do you rip people apart?
it's it's just like I feel like she has this effect on people that I don't understand. Like her defense team is still obsessed with her. They're all still so close to her and are so involved with her in a very atypical way that they
Mm-hmm.
do not have these relationships with their other clients. And it just makes me feel like there's something, I don't know if it's just a manipulation. I don't know what it is, but she has an effect on people that is different than the effect other people have. There's something that makes you want to like protect her, align with her, agree with her, and I don't have it, but maybe that's just because that her light hasn't been shone on me and I've just seen her on TV. But like
Mm-hmm.
if in real life I'd be worried that she could totally convince me of anything.
See, I didn't get that feeling from her at all. Um, like looking at interviews from her and her behaviors, I got a lot of like she's like
Mm,
a little kid that needs protecting that was never taught right from wrong. Like I didn't get that she was manipulative. I think she is, don't get me wrong. But like you said, her defense trial became her new surrogate family. She ended up working for one of them to this day. And
yeah,
like I think they also, this is the first kind of case that they dealt with that media attack because it wasn't just her they went after. They went after her entire team for representing her.
oh yeah,
And
and there's
I, that
definitely
like
things.
bond, yeah, that bond together of like, okay, all of our lives are in danger, but like we're just doing our job. And then I think they generally believe that Casey is innocent from this. And nobody wants to see someone who is innocent go to jail or prison or killed. She was up for the
Death
death
row.
penalty.
Yeah. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, we definitely need to talk about the media and the defense team in general. I have a lot of things to say about Jose Baez and his motivations and the finances of all of this. But before we get into that, I'm going to read George's suicide note just because I think it's like interesting and that there's like a
Mm-hmm.
couple
Yeah.
details in it that I want to discuss. So he wrote it to his wife, Cindy, but her real name is Cynthia. So the note starts with, I'm just going to clear my throat. Cynthia Marie, as you get this letter, this should be no surprise that I have decided to leave this earth because I need to be with Kaylee Marie. I cannot keep going because it should be me that is gone from this earth, not her. I have lived many years. I am satisfied with my decision because I have never been the man you, Lee, Casey, and especially Kaylee Marie deserved. I have never been the man any of you could count on. I have always let each of you down in more ways than I can remember. I do not feel sorry for myself. I am just sorry I burden all of you the way I have. My loss of life is meaningless. Cynthia Marie, you have always worked the hardest, given the most to me, and I have never thanked you. 28 plus years ago, you corrected me, a man who has now found his identity in life. What I mean is, you always challenged me the right way, and I could never live up to your expectations. You have always been smarter, more knowledgeable, and thought things through, and I love you for that. I cannot be strong anymore.
Mm.
Kaylee Marie, our granddaughter, I miss her. I miss her so much. I know you do too. You were always the one that provided for her. What did I provide? I blame myself for her being gone. You know, for months, as a matter of fact, for a year or so, I brought stuff up, only to be told not to be negative. Kaylee Marie, I miss her. I miss her. I want my family back. I sit here falling apart because I should have done more. She was so close to home. Why was she there? Who placed her there? Why is she gone? Why? For months, you and I, especially you, always questioned why. I want this to go away for Casey. What happened? Why could she not come to us? Especially you. Why not Lee? Who was involved with this stuff, Kaylee? I am going crazy because I want to go after these people Casey hung with prior to Kaylee being gone. That is why I got that gun. I wanted to scare these people. You know, they more than they have stated. You cannot sugarcoat, kid glove these people. They need hard knocks to get info from. Sure, that will not bring Kaylee Marie back, but was Casey threatened? You know, Casey does not deserve to be where she is. I miss her. I miss her so much. I am worried for her. Her personal safety is always on my mind. I try to deal with so much, as I do you also. I've never wanted my family in sorrow in any way. I realize families have ups and downs, but we've suffered our share and then some. Cynthia Marie, you've always deserved more, and with me being gone, you will. I've always brought you down. You know that. You are better off. Lee will be there for you. Mallory is such a great woman. I see how you are with her. She is a keeper. Daughter-in-law, I smile when I say her name. Mallory. Please take care of yourself, Lee and Cindy. Someday you will be a great wife to Lee and a fantastic mom. Cindy is a great Grammy and will love you forever. Getting back to why I cannot live anymore. I cannot function knowing our granddaughter is gone. Kaylee Marie never had a chance to grow. I wanted to walk her to school the first day. I wanted to help her in so many ways. I could go on and on. I sit here empty inside for her, for you, for us. Jose keeps calling. Yes, you deserve more, and you will have freedom to enjoy what you deserve. I have taken the meds was given to me with alcohol, and I am ready to give up. As I can tell by my writing and thinking, I'm getting very stupid. Wow, what a word, stupid. Yes, I am. Again, I do not feel sorry for myself. I am stupid. I cannot deal with stuff anymore. The loss of Kaylee Marie, the loss of Casey, the loss of us, Cynthia Marie, the meds, I am ready. Oh, man, this is almost done. You are the best. You've always been. I'm sorry for all that I've done to us. You know I never got to say goodbye. I am at this place, and all is getting foggy, and my writing is all over the place. I love you. I love you. I hope you get to see Casey soon. All the people we met, wow. The writing is getting weird. I love you. I'm sorry. I will take care of Kaylee once I get to God, hopefully. I want to hold her again. I miss her. I will always love us. I'm sorry, Cynthia Marie. I called my mom today. I'm so tired. At least I shaved today. Wow, I'm tripping out. I'm so sorry. I love you, Cynthia Marie. Kaylee, here I come. Lee, I'm sorry. Casey. And that's where it ends. There's no note to Casey. So, it's pretty long for a suicide note, first of all.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting. Also, I think it's interesting that he had a gun and didn't use it for this.
Yeah, because he tried to hang himself.
Well, he took meds and drank a bunch of liquor. Did he try to hang himself? I thought he just took all the pills.
Oh, did he? Maybe that was an act. Like, maybe that was a media thing.
Maybe. I think he took a bunch of pills and drank a lot of alcohol, but like he had sent weird text messages to Jose and to other people, like Casey's lawyer, and so like people were looking for him, and like cops found him at the hotel.
Yeah.
His car was in the parking lot.
And it's not a typical way that a man, this is just generally speaking, like most men who commit suicide are a little bit more violent in their suicide, and women tend to be more of the like take overdose on meds kind of avenue. Men typically go the gun route. So it is interesting that that was the way he decided to try to do this.
Even though he specifically mentioned that he had a gun in this note. So it's like, he had it. It would have, not that I want him to do that, I'm just saying it would have been like easier and more effective.
Mm-hmm. Which again, like you wonder, like
choice.
if he meant it, like was it him just begging for help and like he didn't actually want to die? There's that avenue that I wonder of. You know, sometimes you just kind of like spiral out of control and you're like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore. I wonder if he was just in that state, just like hoping, like, all right, I don't want to deliberately do this, but like if it happens, it happens kind of deal. I don't know.
Yeah, like it feels less intentional somehow.
Right.
I don't know what I think about that. I go back and forth because I feel like there's better ways, more effective ways to do it, but you're right. This is like, it's just like atypical for a man to use this approach, but there are men that use this approach. So,
oh, absolutely.
And it's someone in obviously a really negative space.
Yeah. The note just feels creepy too. Like not creepy as in like because it's a suicide note, but creepy as in like the way he vaguely apologized for things. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It just feels like there's a lot of stuff
why.
that he definitely is guilty of or did that never was caught, that he's like, everybody in the family knows about it, but nobody wants to talk about it kind of thing.
And if you really thought you were going to die, there would be no reason not to put details in because you're not going to have any consequences of it. And I think that I know eventually George is accused of having a role in either the murder of Kaylee or the disposal of the body. It depends on like who you believe and what you think. But I mean, he definitely does not admit to that in any way at all. But he also does not directly apologize for things that we know he did for sure that are just facts. So you're right. It's very vague.
Do we know
the
what
part that I
drugs
really
he took?
I think they were a bunch of like anxiety meds, and he like mixed them.
Okay.
It was like his prescriptions.
Okay. I'm gonna come back to that thought. Yeah.
Okay.
I have an interesting thought that just came to mind for that. Okay, keep going.
Oh, okay. What I was gonna say is like the part I really wanted to talk about was I blame myself for her being gone for months, as a matter of fact, for a year or so, I brought stuff up only to be told not to be negative. And
Right.
makes me think that he's talking about prior to Kaylee's disappearance, that he had been questioning for months what is going on with Casey. Maybe he didn't believe that she really had a job. Maybe he didn't believe that she really had a nanny. Maybe he was noticing that things are going missing, things are being stolen. There was a point where George was accused of taking money, later to find out that it was Casey who was taking money out of her mother's purse. And I think that George was noticing that Casey's stories were not really making sense, and she didn't have money ever. And if you have a full-time job and you live at home, even if you're paying for a nanny, you still should have some money. And I think like her lies were coming apart a little bit. And I think that George maybe brought it up, but didn't actually flush it out. Only to be told not to be negative, which makes me think Cindy's telling him he's being negative. Because she's always very quick to defend Casey.
Yeah. Or is he referring to like the months that Kaylee was missing? And he was bringing up the fact that maybe Kaylee isn't alive and they need to start processing that idea. And Cindy didn't want to even fathom the idea that Kaylee's not alive. They're going to find her and she's going to be okay. That's how I read it.
I was thinking it was prior to her being missing, because he was talking about before that, like, you're always the one that provided for her. What did I provide? I feel like he's been talking in like further past tense, but it really is open to interpretation. It could be either. And I could see either of those things making a lot of sense, and to feel a lot of guilt as a result of not being more firm in either of those things, or even both.
Yeah, it could be.
Because
again, he's drunk and he's on drugs. Like, it could be him merging thoughts together. It could be both.
Yeah. It could be either, could be both. I feel like I think he knew that, well, what I was going to say is the family is not just processing the disappearance and the loss of Kaylee and the arrest and the like imprisonment of Casey. They're also dealing with finding out that everything Casey's been telling them for like 2 years is not true. And I feel like that's really played down because there's such a bigger thing going on. But that would be very hard to process. That someone that you live with, that you see every day, who has these stories about her coworkers and her nanny and what she does all day, and to see her get dressed in the morning every day and leave, like, that would be really hard for me to wrap my head around, and would be like, in any other circumstance, that would be the big thing everybody was focusing on. But because Kaylee's gone, that's obviously trumping it. But you guys have all been just participating in her lies for years. And that's like a huge head change, I feel like. I don't know. I feel like that's underplayed a little bit. It's a huge deal. Her whole life was a lie.
Is. But then it's interesting with Casey's newer interview that she did. She basically saying that she did have a job. It was just not the job that she was telling everybody. That she was working more like at the bar scene, like the sex work scene. Like, she was doing that kind of stuff and getting things in cash to try to like get out of the situation, because it was unhealthy and she didn't want to keep her daughter in it any longer, with the fear of like, as her daughter gets older, that her dad could go after her daughter. So her story years later is that she was mostly working in cash and lying to her parents about what she was doing for work, so that they wouldn't know like how much money she was coming in, or her plans, or things like that. Which again is something that she said years later, but it's interesting that it just depends on who you want to listen to with this entire case, which is all over the place.
I just think that it's hard. So she definitely has said in later years that she did a lot of work as like a shot girl and like for her boyfriends, like promoting company and stuff. That would not have the same hours as like a event planner at Universal Studios, where she's like pretending
Oh
she
yeah.
has a 9 to 5 essentially. So like, and she was home most nights and Kaylee was home most nights. And so there was definitely points that she was on fake business trips. Nobody will know what she was really doing during that time. All of the hours that Kaylee and Casey are missing together while they're at work and the nanny, we won't really know. Like maybe she was involved with people who were selling drugs or in a sex crime ring and that just never came out. But I think mostly she was just like dicking around and wasting a lot of time. But I don't think she was really doing a lot of work because she was doing a lot of stealing and grifting. And I don't know. I don't know what she would have been spending her money on if she was doing anything really profitable. Because she was broke a lot. And to steal from your own grandparents, which she did do, she stole from her grandfather's care funds for his nursing home. And I feel like that's a person who doesn't have a lot of other income opportunities.
Yeah. Or someone that is doing some kind of drug that was never proved, but
yeah,
it also would explain some of the erratic behaviors.
I've always thought that, but I just think shouldn't it be more obvious? Or shouldn't something have come out during like, I mean, I guess maybe she just kicked it really hard when she was first in jail, but like there was no evidence of that. She did like physicals in prison. There was nothing that ever showed that she was like had a drug habit. So I mean,
unless it was new and
yeah,
like just
that's
has
true.
progressively gotten worse. Because
Or like cocaine maybe.
yeah,
Could
like
do
getting
that.
off of, depending on what drug it is, your like detox isn't always as bad as other ones. It just kind of depends on what it is.
That's true. I mean, we'll never really know because her whole life was a
Yeah.
lie.
Well, so talk me through the trial. So we've kind of talked about things that have contributed to the trial, but obviously she was indicted and the case started down in Florida. The investigation itself was handled by the Orange County Sheriff, and then it got passed over. And now we're looking at being convicted for her child's death.
Yes. And it becomes a capital, like death penalty case as well. Which
later
means
into the trial, yeah.
Later
that wasn't off the front, and that's interesting to me, where they started it off just a regular trial, and then they added the capital punishment to the case, which I think is part of where they went wrong.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about that. But I was just going to start with like the differences in the opening statements. Because so Casey's lead defense attorney is Jose Baez, and the lead prosecutor for the state of Florida for this trial is Jeff Ashton, and they have very, very different opening statements. So Jeff says that basically Casey was wanting to party, wanting to drink, wanting to shop, wanting to go out, didn't care about her kid. Her kid was in the way. She was a burden, so Casey got rid of her. That was like the gist of the prosecution's case, essentially, is that she's a bad mother, and bad mothers sometimes kill their kids. And she's just selfish, and there's no extenuating circumstances. And then Jose Baez got up and said a very, very different version of events, which was that Kaylee was never missing. So there was no neglect. There was no child abuse. There was an accident where Kaylee drowned in the family swimming pool and George hid her body in the woods. And the meter reader, Roy Crunk, that found her body, hid it for several months and then put it back in the woods and reported it to try to get money, essentially, for finding the body. So it's very different versions of events. It's premeditated murder or it's an accidental drowning, and then
Mm-hmm.
implicating that George covered it up, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty explosive opening statement. Like, these things had not been said prior in the public. So the media went wild, which is a huge theme throughout.
Right.
And
And George
and then
obviously denied all of that.
he does, and he is the first witness that the prosecution calls. And I think it's important to point out that George was a terrible, terrible witness, and he was called many times during the trial. He was not just on once, he was there many, many times. And he also, he, along with Cindy and Lee, Casey's brother, were granted special permission to be able to watch the entire trial. So usually people who are testifying are not allowed to sit in the courtroom and watch other people testify, because it could shape and change what they're going to say. But because they were victims in this case, the families of the victim, Kaylee, they were given permission to watch the entire trial. So George testified a lot, and he also watched the whole trial. And
Mm-hmm.
his stories did not make sense. They contradicted each other. He was, all in all, not a very good witness for the prosecution. And he adamantly denies all of the charges against him. All of the he was accused of sexually abusing Casey, adamantly, vehemently denies that. Accused of hiding Kaylee's body in the woods, denies it 100%, and has a different version of events for that day. So George basically said that he watched Casey and Kaylee leave for work, with their little backpacks on, and then he went to work and everything was normal, and he never saw Kaylee again. And that's when this whole nightmare started, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So the trial itself is it's interesting. There's a lot of ups and downs. There's a lot of media involvement. I think the forensic evidence is, depending on who you ask and depending on whose version of it you listen to, was it very compelling? Was it junk science? I don't know. What do you think of, like, the air in the cans and the bug evidence and the body seeking dogs? Like, there was a lot
Mm-hmm.
of unusual evidence entered into this case. It wasn't just like DNA. There was no scientific cause of Kaylee's death that was ever found. So everything is kind of just speculation and circumstantial, in my opinion.
Well, oh, no, everything was extremely circumstantial, and that's one thing that was part of their issue in the prosecutor's case, because most of the time the introduction of a cadaver dog or the introduction of um, these expert witnesses who are talking about the growth of the Florida plants, which is one of the things they talked about like how it would decay the body and like
Mm-hmm.
estimating the time frame that it was left out there. Those are all very circumstantial because you can get an expert witness is someone who is paid to go to a trial and tell about science. These are not people who are just casually there volunteering. Like, they're getting paid to show up.
A
And
lot.
if you, oh yeah, a lot of money. And if you look hard enough, science is not perfect, no matter what it is. So if
Mm-hmm.
you look hard enough for something, you're gonna be able to find an expert witness who says what you want them to say. And
Yes.
I think that's part of the reason why most cases you want a combination of something like DNA, theory, and circumstantial evidence to kind of build your case together. And this case was so strongly built on circumstantial evidence that from
Mm-hmm.
me, there was day one, there was no way they were going to get a conviction for what they were trying for, simply because there was no hard evidence. Everything was theory, everything was speculation. Um, But I think the media played such a factor in getting them to rush to trial before they were ready. And like
Very, very
cadaver
good
dogs,
point.
super popular to use. They're all over the place. Drug dogs, cadaver dogs, everywhere. But normally it's the supporting evidence to, all right, and here's the body, here's the DNA we found from the body, blah, blah, blah. Not, well, we found, used this dog, he alerted, didn't find anything, but here's our theory for it. Like, it's easy to
Right.
poke holes in theory. And all the
It is.
defense's job is not to prove that she didn't do it. The defense's job is to prove what you're saying doesn't make sense. All you're gonna do is poke a
Yes.
hole in theory and
Demonstrate
she's done.
demonstrate reasonable doubt, which I think
Mm-hmm.
they did do. I really think they did
Oh,
do. And I
100%.
think that the jury got a ton of shit for ultimately, I mean, spoiler alert. I feel like everyone knows though that she was like ultimately like not convicted, and I think that that came down to there's a lot of reasonable doubt and there's a lot of unknowns. And
Right.
I think that the trial by media made things a lot harder in on both sides, but definitely because all of the evidence, quote quote, that was presented on from the prosecution side was already played out in the media. And it seemed more solid when it played out in the media because there was no questioning and back and
Pushback.
forth about it. Things were put out as facts, and those facts were absorbed by the public, and it like people thought that they were definitely 100% true, but some of the things were flushed out in court, like the dead body in the car, the smell, the hair banding. They found one hair in the trunk that had something called a death band on it, which is like a
Mm-hmm.
darkening at the root, the bottom of the hair, that was found in the trunk. And like there was evidence of bugs that are associated with dead bodies found in the trunk. But it sounds kind of convincing until you look at it's literally one hair, and this type of hair does not only come from dead bodies. If I take a hair out of my head and I leave it out in the sun for a month, it may also develop a death band even though I'm still alive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of the evidence was put into question, and that's where the reasonable doubts came in. Because what did they really have, like in hard evidence?
I don't think they really had anything other than a body. And
I
that body was confirmed it was Kaylee, but there was no
mhm.
confirmed like cause of like they don't know, it was undetermined.
Yeah, and that's because the remains were skeletonized, I believe. And so it's going to be a limited autopsy. And there's
Mm-hmm.
question about, did Dr. G do a shitty autopsy, or did the defense do a better autopsy? Was the body moved? Was it not moved? There's a lot of questions about Roy Crunk, who was the person that ultimately found the body, because he had reported finding the body a couple of months prior to that as well, and it was not recovered by the police at that time. And he came back to the same spot months later and called again. And there's a lot of suspicious, weird things about him. But I mean, I ultimately don't think he was involved at all in the murder or disposal of Kaylee Anthony, but I don't know if he tampered with the crime scene.
Right.
He probably did.
Well, yeah, because if you think about, so Kaylee's body was found in a bag, in another bag with a blanket. Like, it wasn't just like laying out in the ground. Like,
Yeah.
and natural curiosity is if you like, there's this missing little girl and you see a plastic bag that is just random. If you poke at it and see like what comes out of it, that's disturbing the body. But how else are you supposed to
Yeah.
find what's in it? And
Right.
it is kind of weird though, because it was like where Kaylee was found was a dumping ground for a bunch of trash anyway. So like, why are you poking around trash? It's weird. Like, just
Yeah.
casually.
It was like 19 feet off the road, which doesn't sound like that much, but it was like a wooded, marshy, disgusting area full
That
of trash.
everyone dumped trash. Yeah, like why are
Yeah.
you roaming around in there?
He said he was looking for somewhere to pee. I don't know. I don't know if he got a tip off. We'll never know.
Right.
But I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's super bizarre to find a skull and then a couple months later re-find the skull, and this time you can actually convince the cops that it's there.
Mm-hmm.
And he also told people that he was going to come into a lot of money because he found the missing girl. Again,
Right.
months before this body was actually recovered. So I don't know if that would have made a huge difference, because there could have been evidence that otherwise was not available. But I mean, we'll never know.
Right. And we won't. But then there you
Yeah.
have the prosecutors. One argument that they were making was the duct tape that we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
Duct tape was found on Kaylee, and it was placed overlapping, covered her mouth. So she basically suffocated. However, there's zero DNA on the duct tape. And from the size of that little girl, why would you go that route? Like they argued chloroform was used, but you can't just go buy chloroform in like the Stop and Shop. And
Right.
you can't make it in your house. Yeah, you can Google it, but it's not going to be right. Like,
Yeah, it needs to be distilled. It's a whole process to make chloroform.
mhm,
And there's no way that Casey made chloroform. There's no evidence that she made it. There's also no reason that she would need it, because to your point, it would not really actually be hard to overpower / intentionally kill a toddler. I
right,
mean, I know Casey was so tiny and everyone talked about how cute she was, but she definitely was a lot bigger than Kaylee, and it would not have been difficult
100%.
at all.
And
Um,
but their prosecution's justification of, oh, it had to be her is because there was the same brand of duct tape inside the Anthony home.
mhm,
That same brand of duct tape is probably in thousands of people's homes.
probably.
But
Yeah.
you have sheriff's officers who did investigations that will openly say at that point, and even now, they never considered any other suspect other than Casey. And that, I
Yeah.
think, is where the downfall started, is because
Mm.
when you are doing an investigation and you are focused on one, this person did it. There's no question in your mind. They started pulling things to support their theory. They started doing whatever they need to do. Like, okay, Casey's guilty. Well, we have duct tape. Duct tape's in her home. All right, we have this. Well, this is near her, in her proximity. There was a Google about chloroform. Well, it was on the family computer. She has access to the family computer. Had to be her. They never once
Oh,
considered anybody else in the house.
I definitely want to talk about the computer evidence. To me, the computer evidence is way better than any of the forensic, like, science shit that they found. That is all nonsense, in my opinion. The
Mm-hmm.
computer evidence, though, I actually think that Casey did make the chloroform searches, and the defense agrees that she made the searches because her boyfriend posted something on MySpace about, it was like a meme, basically, like in the early 2000s meme, and it said something like, win her over with chloroform, and her boyfriend had posted it on MySpace, and she looked it up the same day that it was posted on MySpace. The fact that her mother later claimed it was her that made the search also makes me call everything into question with, like, believing
I
a
was just
single
gonna
member
say
of
that.
the Anthonys, because they're all liars and they'll all tell whatever story they think someone's going to believe,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's totally not true. Like, it does not have to have a basis in reality. She had a whole story about, oh, I thought my dogs were eating plants in the yard and I wanted to make sure they weren't poisoned and I misspelled chlorophyll and yada yada yada. It was not her, it was Casey. But it's very hard to put somebody behind a computer screen. So we have to just say that searches were made in the Anthony home on a family
Mm-hmm.
computer. But there's a huge part that was missing from the prosecution's case, which was like I think where they really lost, honestly, is there was two search engines on the computer. There was like Internet Explorer and Mozilla Firefox, and the prosecution only had stuff from the Internet Explorer. They did not present anything from the Firefox. They didn't have it. Their expert missed it. The defense found it. And in Jose Baez's book, he talks about how there were searches made for foolproof suffocation, and those were not talked about in the trial. It was talked about afterwards. It was not included in the prosecution's case. And to me, it seems like the only person that could have made that search based on the MySpace and Facebook searches afterwards, it's probably Casey.
I don't know. Because again, you can't necessarily prove that she was the one on that computer. And I also don't know if like they missed it or if they just chose not to include it, because it may not have helped their case. Because there's plenty of stuff that like it's discretionary of like, all right, they may not have like found it, but also like, all right, we're not going to bring this one thing up because this hurts our case. Like, gotta wonder if they did know about it and just were like, we're gonna skirt around that point. Like,
yeah. I mean, I've read articles, like I'm looking at one from CBS right now that said prosecutor Jeff Ashton told it's a shame that they didn't have the suffocation search as evidence. This certainly would have put the accidental death claims in serious question. It was a mistake investigators could learn from. It was literally missed.
But then again, you're rushing into this trial when you didn't take the time to then do those searches. Like, you allowed the media to pressure you to go into trial before you were ready.
Definitely. I definitely agree with that. I think that they were so convinced that Casey did this thing, and I could see why, because the way that she acted was completely not normal. It was completely bizarre. She wasted a ton of police time. She was stealing. She was lying. You cannot believe a word that she says. And George and Cindy are cooperating. Casey is not cooperating. Casey, they're able to make look like a party girl, a whore, you know, a negligent mother. And I think that the cops and the prosecution's office were 100% convinced that she did it. So they thought that they could convince a jury and that it would be just so obvious.
Yeah, I think the investigators absolutely thought that. I don't know if the prosecutors necessarily did as much as presented the idea that they did, because they have to once you get to trial. I think it, unfortunately, the way our justice system works is, and this was a monumental case for that, is the media world can drive action from law enforcement. And I think you're right when you say that they were convinced Casey did it, but I think that it drove them to be more confident than they actually were.
Yeah.
But 100%
it seemed like a no-brainer.
Right. Yeah. But I don't think prosecutors really were given the opportunity to say, we're not ready yet. I don't think that was an option given to them. I think it was, you have to do this and you have to do this now. Like,
there was definitely a huge push.
Yeah. Which is unfortunate.
It's really ironic, honestly. If there wasn't so much media attention surrounding this, I think Casey would be on death row right now, because I think that she would have not. So there's a huge thing that I want to talk about, which is how, like, Casey's defense was hundreds of thousands of dollars in experts, in lawyer time, in resources, and they had so many interns and associates working on this case. I mean, Jose Baez literally went into foreclosure on his house. He almost lost his practice. It was so much unpaid time that he took away from his other clients. And he's a private attorney. Like, he works on an hourly, like, this is so bizarre for someone to do this. Like, essentially pro bono, even though he had not ever declared it as a pro bono situation. So ultimately, Casey declared bankruptcy after the trial, but you can't get blood from a stone. Jose was never paid for this time. And I think that if there, I mean, you could maybe argue that Jose was just so noble and he knew that she was innocent and wanted to ruin his life to make sure that she would not go to prison or death row. But I don't believe that. I think that he saw an opportunity. This was unprecedented media attention. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And he thought that if he could really, really get her off, that he would be famous and he'd be sought after and he'd be rich and all of these sacrifices would be worth it. But ironically, if the media had not done this, I think he would have probably pled her out. I don't think there would have been this huge, we're going to do anything we can to make sure that you're not convicted.
I don't know.
It's
Because you got to remember,
it's
in order to
super
plea
bizarre.
out, Casey has to agree to it. If Casey's not willing to agree to it, you can't plea out anybody.
But no, this is not normal for a defense attorney to spend this amount of time and resources and money knowing that they are not going to be compensated for it. She paid a very small retainer and
you got to
never
also
paid
wonder
anything again.
if his thought process is it wasn't that he was going to get it from her, but he was going to get it from the state. Because if you can get her off, you can then go after the state for reimbursement of
He didn't get it.
suffering and things like that. Right. We know that now, but like in his mind of the state's got deep pockets. If you're accusing this girl and trying to basically take her life, that's a big paycheck if he wins against the state after the fact.
I'm just saying, I think it's really, really bizarre. And
It is bizarre.
I don't think that he would have done this, which is not a shade at Jose. I don't think he should have done this, to be honest. He really could have ruined his life. I mean, maybe not, because he did do a really good job and he did become very famous during this trial and he's still like very well renowned as a result of this. And he was offered a teaching job at Harvard after the case was over. Like he went on to defend Aaron Hernandez. Like he's done a lot of high profile stuff, but this was his first high profile case. And he had worked other cases where people were accused of murder and he did not spend this kind of time, money, resources. He flew to the Netherlands to do DNA research. It was bizarre. Because the media drove it.
And it's like you said, it's media related, but I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that. Like, if media wasn't there, he wouldn't have done it. Just because, again, he is a private attorney, so they're going to go a little bit farther than a public defense attorney. But
sure,
I think he had to.
Attorney would have done any of that. I think he had to because it was in the spotlight.
Right.
I don't think it would have been like this. Yeah.
I don't know if I agree with that. She would have been in jail. I think the prosecution had way too much. It wasn't hard to poke holes in their case, unfortunately. I'm not saying that she should have got off, but I don't think she would be in jail for life. I don't.
But we don't know, because if it hadn't been for the media attention, she would have actually had an entirely different judge and she would have had an entirely different jury, and this would have been prosecuted in a different county. But because of the media, all of those things changed. Like during the trial that had already started, Judge Strickland was the beginning judge. He had to recuse himself because he was having like inappropriate friendships with internet trolls. Mm-hmm. And taking them for tours around the courthouse and giving them exclusive information about the trial and he had to recuse himself. So
yeah, that one surprised me for sure.
Every single thing was different because of the media. And that's the only reason we're talking about this now too, because let's say that she did kill Kaylee. It's not that unusual. People kill their kids. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. Absolutely terrible, but we do not know the names of all the people that kill their kids.
Right.
And Casey is famous. And part of what she's famous for is being a media villain. Mm-hmm. And even now, she's so recognizable.
Yeah. So I guess my to pull everything together, what is your theory about what happened and what the outcome should have been? What is your theory?
So I've had many theories over the years, but I will tell you that my current theory.
Current one, as of today.
So I think as of today, which could change tomorrow, but as of today, I think that Casey knew that her dad was going to find out about all her lies. I think that she was worried that things that she was doing were going to be exposed. I think she pretended to go to work that day. I think she came back to the house after her dad left. I think she looked up the foolproof suffocation. I think it was a murder-suicide attempt that she bailed on. I think that's why there was no plan for what she was going to do afterwards, because I do not think she thought there was going to be an afterwards. I think she killed Kaylee. I think she wrapped her in the Winnie the Pooh blanket, ditched her in the woods, and just totally compartmentalized and convinced herself of a different reality. Went to her boyfriend's house, was kind of on the run, but in a very lazy way. She wasn't very far away. But she starts doing things that I think speaks to someone who is unhinged and maybe a little desperate and maybe knows that they're kind of running out of time. And she's getting a new tattoo. She's stealing checks. She's borrowing her friend's car without his knowledge. And then she finally got caught by her mom finding her and had to provide an explanation of where Kaylee is, and she did not want a cop to doing anything, so she just picked someone else and blamed them. There have been definitely points where I thought that George was involved, but my current thought is that if he was involved in any way and that she could have blamed him for it, that she would have immediately blamed him for it, or at the very least, when she'd been arrested, she would have been blaming him for it, and it wouldn't have taken so long to come out. So I think, in my opinion, I think that she did it by herself and covered it up by herself, and that it was intentional. Things went kind of awry, and she just has convinced herself to the point that she did not do this. And I think that she hated George for a lot of other reasons, and that's why she blames him for it now, because it's much easier than blaming herself. So that's my theory.
Yeah, it would be easy to just be like the deflection of putting it on him so she didn't have to like cope and process like of her own actions.
Yeah. What do you think?
I agree with part of it and I disagree with part of it, is my theory. So
sure, run me through it.
Yeah, my theory is I think George was involved. I don't think he was as responsible as like her defense team argued. I think they did it together. I think you were totally right where she was kind of doing all this crazy behavior, lying, stealing prior to. And I think she started neglecting Kaylee a little bit, where the outside perspective was, oh my God, she's this amazing mother, so attentive. But the two of them, I think when they were alone, she started being like, it was overwhelming for her and probably wasn't paying as much attention as she should be to Kaylee. I do think she got in the pool and I do think Kaylee drowned. And I think Casey saw that, found her dead. And that's when George came home. And the two of them had pretty much made this argument and like she manipulated George. I'm going off the fact that there's too much like behavioral things that I believe that George probably did like abuse his daughter. And that is within the statute of limitation. She still, in that day, could have gone to the police and George could have gone to prison. And I think she's smart enough to manipulate that, going, my child is dead. You just came home. You're going to help me or I'm going to go to the police. And I'm going to tell them all the things that you did. And then they're going to believe that you did it. So the two of them together orchestrated the bagging up her daughter, hiding her, and then agreed, all right, we're going to pretend like this never happened. So she went off and did her life. And when the police found her and like mom noticed the baby wasn't here and all these things, she couldn't blame her dad because in order to do that, she would also be incriminating herself. And her best tactic at that point was deny, 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 because if she brought up her dad at all, then she would be basically staying her own guilt. And her father is the same thing, is deny, 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 because if I admit anything, I'm going down for something else. And I think they are so similar and they're both so toxic together that if we have this agreement that I go down, you go down, so they kind of just protected each other in a way.
So like mutually assured destruction.
Yeah. I think that it was, I'll help you stay out of jail if you help me stay out of jail.
I mean, that could be. And it could be that when Casey, if that is what happened, and then Casey is blaming George for some of it, all of it, abuse, not abuse, whatever, during the trial, maybe that's why he was willing to testify against his own kid in a death penalty case, because I do think that that's pretty unusual, weird behavior.
Right.
And
And most
it
of
could
his,
be revenge.
yeah, most of his conversations with the police that were negative against Casey were done in private, secret, like unknown to others.
Right.
He was the star witness in her indictment for the capital charge, which is so bizarre. And nobody knew that because they're secret.
Right.
And then he would like tell Casey one thing to her face and then go to the police and be like, nope, 100% was my kid. Like, was Casey, here's why, and like kind of direct the interview. Um, I think he wanted her in jail to protect himself, but didn't want her to turn on him, which is why, like, more publicly, he was doing another thing. Because again, I think they're both very smart and they're both very manipulative. That he saw the opportunity of, all right, well, I can get both if she goes down for it, but I keep this like persona of quote helping her, then I'm scot free. And I think that suicide moment was his panic of, oh my God, what if the plan doesn't work?
Hmm. Yeah, it could
That's
be.
my
And I've
theory.
definitely I've definitely had that theory before. I think maybe a little ironically, I started thinking, because I've gone back and forth over the years many times about what I think about this. And especially George's involvement has always been something that I've been kind of like wrestling with, I guess, of what I think about it. There's been points where I've been convinced that he 100% was involved, and there's been points where I think he didn't know anything. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is the newer interviews like we were talking about. So I think part of the problem with this family is that they cannot fucking stay out of the media, and they look so bad. They come off terribly. I thought Casey's new Peacock documentary, I thought she seemed like a psycho in that. I watched her
Oh,
parents
yeah.
did a new special this year where they took lie
Also
detector
looked
tests.
crazy.
They
I,
were
but
unhinged
again,
in it.
this lie detector test, once again, very circumstantial. They're not hard to beat.
I know. And I think that Casey would also pass a lie detector test at this point because they are all
Exactly.
pathological liars. So it does not mean anything to me that they passed it. And that's why if I was friends with George and Cindy, I would be like, guys, shut up. Shut up.
Just,
You should stop talking about this forever. You should never mention this again. It makes you seem so unhinged. You'll never come off well. The end of the day, you raised Casey. Everyone hates Casey. You can't. There's no redemption arc that's possible for these people. So it's better to me if they just lived quietly, but they refuse to do that. I mean,
but
at
who's
least
going
in
to pay their
Casey's
bills
defense,
then?
I guess. At least in Casey's defense, this is the first time she's really done media, but George and Cindy don't stop. They've done many,
Right.
many, many, many specials, and I watched all of them, which also makes me unwell. It makes me unwell. But I am obsessed with these people because they are so unhinged and none
Yeah.
of their stories make any sense. And the whole time I'm just like, tell me what really happened. I don't understand. And
Oh, I
I'm just like
know.
screaming at my TV. And it's the sickest thing. But I actually felt like in the Peacock special, the new one that Casey made, where she
Mm-hmm.
was talking about the day that Kaylee died, that she saw her dad holding Kaylee soaking wet, and he told her that he would take care of everything. And then she thought that she just had to do whatever he wanted and she would get Kaylee back. That doesn't make any sense at all. It does not make any sense at all. Because if you saw her soaking wet and dead, and then you're also saying that you do not believe that she died in the pool, it doesn't make sense. And why would you
Yeah.
still be sitting in jail when you know that she's dead, saying, she's close, I think she's alive, I think we'll find her, like all this stuff? It does not make sense. And if you had been arrested and you truly believed that your father is holding an alive Kaylee hostage somewhere, that is what you would say to the police, because you're already arrested for murder. If you think she's alive, that would be the time to say that.
Yeah. I don't
And
think she
she
ever thought
didn't.
he was alive. That's the thing. I
She's
think she
she said
knew.
it in the Peacock thing. She said it, that I thought I would get her back.
I know. I know.
It
But again, that's
doesn't
the
make sense.
disassociation. Like
Oh,
if her version is true, that's the disassociation of, okay, well maybe she wasn't dead. Maybe she was just like limp or something like that. I don't know. Like that's that disassociation that like years of abuse and trauma can develop. So like it just depends on if you believe her
ugh.
entire version.
Well, I don't. I don't believe anything she says. I don't believe anything she's ever said. But it's so hard because I don't believe anything George says either. So there's no one that will ever be able to prove to me what happened, and there is no forensic proof of what happened either. So this is
Yeah.
all just speculation. It's all just circumstantial, and I'll never know. But this is like my Roman Empire, and I think about it at least once a week, and I'll never know.
I know. And then I'm sure in a year from now you'll have a new theory.
Probably. Probably. I mean, when I first read Jose Baez's book, the defense attorney, when I first read his book, because I read his before I read Jeff Ashton's, I was like, wow, Casey's innocent. That's crazy. And I'd already been like obsessed with the case for years prior to reading that. And then I read Jeff's book and I was like, wow, Jeff is a monster. Maybe Casey's innocent. And then I watched an interview with her parents and I was like, I think they all killed her together. And
Yeah,
now
I
I
think there was
don't know.
involvement. I just do.
I,
I don't know.
but did Cindy know anything? Was Lee a predator? Like, I don't know. And
Yeah.
now there's no relationship between these people, which is a change because pretty recently Casey and Cindy had a relationship, but in the new lie detector special, the parents watched Casey's new special, and that was horrible. They had really, really poor reactions to everything, of course, and were devastated by what she was saying. And Casey at some point asked if she could have Kaylee's ashes and like her toys and her things that are still all at her parents' house. And her mom was like, no, because you dumped her in the woods and you didn't love her as much as I did, basically. So you don't get it.
Which is still messed up.
It's messed up, but it's also like if you killed her and put her in the woods, then yeah, you can't have her ashes.
But there's no proof that she did.
I know, but there's no proof she didn't.
Maybe they should split it. Then be like, all right, you can have half the ashes.
I know. Because, like, part of me thinks that Cindy and Kaylee are, like, the true victims in the situation. But
Yeah.
I
Not
don't
once have
know.
I thought that Cindy was involved.
Cindy is a wild card, though. I don't understand. And how are you still with George? They're still married. It makes no sense. I
I think
can't
that's
imagine
codependence
people
at its
that should
finest.
get divorced more than them. Like, get
Yeah.
divorced, guys. And that's not my advice usually. Get divorced. This is so toxic and so bad. And they act like, oh, we're the only people that can support each other through this. You guys aren't supporting each other. You're keeping each other stuck. You're both getting more fucked up by the day because of this. It's not helping. So they should have split up 30 years ago, and now I'm giving them a new opportunity to split up. So if you guys are listening, I'm so sorry about everything I said, but I think it would be better if you just went your separate ways, because they are so unhinged. But I also, to play devil's advocate, if Casey really did just kill their granddaughter and they did not know anything about it, of course they're traumatized and they're so messed up from that. And all of these
Yeah.
responses could be grief responses. You could also say that about Casey's responses, that maybe she
Mm-hmm.
did know that Kaylee was dead, and that's why she went off for a month and fucked off and did whatever, because nothing mattered, because she knew her daughter was dead. So she was never missing, she was never neglected, she was dead the whole time. So Casey was just having a grief response. I think you can make arguments for all of this,
Yeah.
but it's frustrating that we'll never know.
Yeah. Well, any final thoughts for your Roman Empire of Casey
I
Anthony?
don't think so. I could just scream about this all day, but I think I'm good. I think I'm good. I think that Jose Baez did a great job, is my ultimate conclusion.
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, as much as we are upset about how the case went, her defense team did exactly what they were hired, like their job. They did a great job, and
Mm-hmm.
it's what like, and I gotta give I think my last comment would be, I give those jurors so much credit because they truly stuck to the jury instructions they were given. They followed the law. There was not enough hard evidence to convict her, and that's the only reason that they said no and
Right.
found not guilty, was just because there was, the defense team did exactly what our system's designed to do, is if there is reasonable doubt, we don't want innocent people in jail. And
Right.
it wasn't proven beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think my last comment is, I give those jurors so much credit out of everything. They stuck to our system and they did a good job.
Yeah. They made a hard choice, but I agree.
All right. Well,
Oh.
Casey Anthony, one
Check.
of our favorites.
Yes. She'll always be my favorite, but I mean, I guess we could revisit this at a later date if new specials come out, because I'll have
I'm
to
sure they
watch them.
will. Give it
But
time.
I'll have to watch them. My eyes will be forced open and I'll be watching them. But all right, I guess I'll let you jump off here.
Yeah, and till next week when we find our next mother to talk about.
Our next mother. All right, bye-bye.
Bye.